Good morning, everyone. I'm Tracy Noah from the Marion Library Service, and welcome to our Library Through the Lens live webinar with special guest author Gina Inverarity in conversation with Joe Case. Since the closure of our libraries and venues, we've been working hard to still connect and engage with you through our Library Through the Lens series of adult programs delivered differently. We had to reimagine how to bring you the author talks that you've grown to expect from us, so thank you for joining us today. This morning, Gina, a former editor originally from the Adelaide Hills and now living in Wellington, New Zealand, will talk about her first young adult novel, Snow, a rich and lyrical Snow White retelling. Please feel free at any time during the presentation to type questions you have for Gina into the Q&A text box on your screens, and she will answer these later. Imprints Booksellers is our bookseller partner for today's webinar, and you can order copies of Snow via phone, email or online at www.imprints.com.au. Now sit back, relax and welcome Gina and Joe.
Thank you, Tracy, and it's such a delight to be here talking to Gina Inverarity about her beautiful Snow White retelling dystopia, Snow. So I think I've got so many questions to ask you, Gina, because this book is full of so many aspects. And, you know, I'm particularly fascinated, as I think a lot of people are, by the way that you have created this original world and tale using Snow White as an inspiration. So I might start off with asking you about that. I've read some online reviews that describe Snow as a retelling of the Disney version, but I think your inspiration goes back further than that, doesn't it, to earlier versions of the tale?
Yeah, definitely the earlier versions, the Grimm brothers fairy tales. That's the original that I was kind of working off. But as I kind of went down that rabbit hole of research, I found that they, you know, the Grimm brothers had, you know, based their version on even earlier European folk tales. So even their version is a version, which I quite liked. And yeah, so I guess I just used their kind of scaffolding of that. It's called Little Snow White in their collection. Yeah, so and just use that scaffolding of their kind of plot points. But the Disney version I haven't seen, honestly, for a long time. Yeah, I mean, since I was a kid, probably, you know, the cartoon version.
Yeah, I think I'm the same, actually. Yeah, it was a long time ago.
I could probably, if I did see it, I could probably like quote the dialogue word for word, though. Like, you know, it's in there somewhere, right?
Somewhere in your subconscious, but you were drawing on the Grimm's versions.
Yeah, well, that is the weird thing, isn't it? When you come to write, you find all of this stuff that you hadn't even known that you know bubbling up from goodness knows where.
Of course. So what was it about the idea of Snow White and those versions that inspired you, that drew you to use them for the book?
Honestly, I can't quite remember why it was Snow White. I guess the obvious connection is just how appropriate the setting is in New Zealand, and I really wanted to write something set here. So, you know, obviously the mountain, I mean, the thing about New Zealand is that it's almost like a reimagined Europe in that way, but kind of wilder and less tame than that kind of pastoral, idyllic kind of setting that the Grimm brothers original was from. So I guess that's why and I honestly, you know, that's just one of those weird connections that just happened. Snow White, yeah.
It just came to you and you started from there. You didn't.
Yeah, that's right.
Why?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, except I tried to resist all of the, you know, tropes that come along with that, with the original, you know, that Snow White is, you know, white skin and black hair and all of that. I wanted to get away from all of that as well. So hopefully I managed to convey that in the book.
Yeah. So you got away from that impossible beauty kind of element, even though she is quite beautiful in her own way.
Well, yeah, I tried never to kind of explicitly, you know, say that, but, you know, I try to emphasize her coolness rather than...
You definitely get that. And she's so intrepid as well. I mean, Snow is a fantastic character, and I think I was saying to you that I've had some feedback that she's a great feminist role model as well. That, you know, she's practical and down to earth, but she's also not immune to the delights of a lively dance or a nice dress. She's fiercely, although she doesn't find a nice dress very often wandering the wilderness, she's fiercely individual, she's a survivor, and she's intuitively in tune to animals and the environment that she inhabits. Can you talk a bit about Snow as a character and how you created her?
I mean, she's a product of her world. That's, you know, that's where I kind of grounded her. You know, she's a survivor because everyone is. That's just the way that the world is, kind of in this future that I've imagined. Those kind of skills, everyday skills for getting along and surviving, like the cold and just that the lack of resources is what... So that's what shaped her. And then I guess the kind of feminist stuff, that's all... I mean, I can't not write that, you know. So that's just what happens, you know. This, as soon as you start, well, and you make choices obviously when you're writing, you know, is she going to like doing the housework for the miners like she does in the original? I was just reading it, you know. She heartily agrees when they suggest that she, you know, do their cooking and cleaning. So obviously my Snow's she's not gonna like that. So just at every point there's a choice of, you know, how she's gonna react. And so you know, when you're writing a character like that, you're always filtering everything through that, you know, it's your own prism really, isn't it? And so her choices are a reflection of my choices, I guess.
So you identify with Snow?
Yeah, definitely.
She's in that place. Yeah.
She's a lot better at being in the outdoors than I am, though. Like, I'm a bit of a wuss when it comes to being cold or dark or uncomfortable.
But as you say, you know, she's a product of her environment. So if you were put in that situation, maybe, you never know.
I'm sure I would rise to the occasion. Thanks, Jo.
I'd like to maybe just wind back a moment, because I realise that we're talking about the details, and it might be good to, just for anyone who hasn't read the book, set up what the scenario is, like what the world that you've built on the scaffolding of Snow White is, and what this situation we're talking about is. Can you just give us paint us a bit of a picture?
Sure. Well, what I imagined is I've just kind of extrapolated, you know, into the future, like kind of post climate change, or there's been some sort of a collapse, you know, whether it's an economical collapse or you know, one following the other, really. But what's happened is there's been a sea level rise, and the climate has changed, you know, kind of catastrophically. And there's also been you know, a kind of condensing of people in place. You know, the world has become hyper-local, as someone described it as. So people don't travel, you know, overseas anymore. And
as we don't.
Somehow that may have happened. But and so, you know, everything, like I said, just flows on from that. Her choices are limited. Life is just tough. It's hard. And as well as that, there's this kind of cold and a lack of sun. The sky is clouded over. And so there's no sun, there's no stars. The weather just is really unsettled all the time. Also like Wellington. Anyone's ever heard of Wellington, they always have heard that the weather here is unsettled. Yeah, so that's And then there's, the plot of the novel follows the plot points of Snow White roughly, with a few extra twists thrown in.
Yeah, so you've basically taken this world where where climate change has made the place incredibly cold. It's basically a new ice age, isn't it?
Yeah, kind of. Yeah, which is almost the opposite of what's predicted. So I did kind of twist that a little bit. It's not a hot, dry planet. It's kind of some sort of feedback loop has happened and it's gone back the other way. I don't specify what's happening in other parts of the planet though, so I kind of stick to New Zealand. But it is called New Zealand, but it's this New Zealand of the future where the island shapes is different and people move around differently.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, again, we're taking the landscape of New Zealand and where you live, and with the scaffolding of Snow White, with all these elements, you built your own world, but just taken elements of that to build it on, haven't you?
Definitely. Yeah.
Very imaginative storytelling. And I think so. We've got Snow, who, as in Snow White, her mother has died when she was very young, and she has no memory of her. She grew up with her father, and then the stepmother came along, and she was somewhat sidelined. Stepmother wasn't very nice. You could even say evil. And after her father died, Snow's been exiled by her stepmother. So it's following Snow White in that sense. And the character of the hunter from Snow White, who is sent to kill her but doesn't do it, becomes a lot more pivotal in your version of the story. Can you talk a bit about the hunter and his relationship with Snow White and the role he plays in the story?
Yeah. There was a line in the Grimm Brothers version. After he kind of decides that he's not going to kill Snow White, there's a line that says, "It seemed as if a stone had been rolled from his heart, since it was no longer needful for him to kill her." And so I kind of took that and based the hunter's character. So he's always got this thing on his conscience that he left. He didn't kill Snow White, but he still left her. This kind of a child, really. She's kind of 12-ish, 12, 13. Left her in the forest, to starve or die of the cold or whatever. He didn't actually kill her, but, he may as well have. Yeah. So then that's compounded by other things that happen to him later in the novel. There are voyagers, I call them voyagers, they're kind of refugees who are coming constantly to the lower island and travelling up and over the mountains and kind of ending up in Snow White's region. And he encounters some of them and, on Rain's orders or whatever, shuts
Rain
them
being
up.
the stepmother.
Yeah, the stepmother, yeah. And so he's got a lot on his conscience. They die in the snow, and so he's got a lot on his conscience. And so I just kind of played that up and kind of intensified it to build his character. So he's always he feels bad, and he's constantly trying to make himself feel better and work out how he's going to make it right. Yeah. His act of leaving her in the snow. She's kind of forgiven him for that. But he hasn't forgiven himself.
No. So that question of how to be a good person, which is often at the heart of storytelling, that's really played out a lot through him, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. And occasionally, it's a difficulty in Snow White is, when your main character is unconscious or dead. And you've chosen to tell the story in first person, you're left without a narrator. So he has to kind of come in and take over the storytelling, and at a couple of times in the book. And so you get more inside of his head and hear a little bit more about, how he's motivated.
That's interesting. I was going to ask you why you decided to bring him in as a narrator occasionally. I was very surprised when I first encountered him because you've been so deeply inside Snow's head for quite a while. So that was a technical consideration, it sounds like, somewhat.
A little bit.
That's really interesting. It doesn't read like that. I thought you must have like a deeper motivation. So,
well, you know, these things happen early on in drafts, and you know, you get to a certain point and realize, oh well, what happens now if your narrator is unconscious? How does the story keep going unless you're going to go back and rewrite it, you know, in third person, which is a lot of work. So probably just out of laziness.
Out of laziness, great things are born. Actually, I think people are always curious as to writing process, and this just seemed like a good time to ask you, how much of the story was planned from the beginning? How much did you know was going to happen, and how much just kind of came to you as you wrote and was invented along the way?
Well, I guess that's the thing about using doing a version of something, is that you've got that scaffolding there that you're following, and you know, so you've already got a structure that then you just kind of build your own story around. And so, I mean, there's still a lot of room though for things to come up and go in there that you and you know, it's only when I don't know, you'd be watching a movie or you know, rereading something and you realize, oh wow, I had forgotten that I knew that or read that or whatever, and it's cropped up and come into, you know, into the story in another way. And then there's practical considerations, like, you know, when you're writing, you need to solve problems as you go along, like something's happened and you need to account for it. So there's a lot of that as well that just kind of goes into building that texture and that richness that you're always trying to go for in storytelling.
Great. So it sounds like it's a bit of layering that goes on then. Something, you know, there are things you know you're going to do, and then, you know, there are layers that either work their way in or that you realise you need to build in as you go.
That's really true. And that's just one of the discoveries, you know, about my own kind of writing process that I made, is that, you know, you'll build it, but then you go back in and you make more of things and like flesh them out, and then so you can always add layers to things, like, you know, like you say. And I hadn't really realized that about the writing process before I really got into it, and it's one of the funnest parts, really. Like,
I find that very encouraging as a process, because it means it doesn't have to be great on the page the first time, because you're coming back. So
that's so true. And from my background as an editor, you know, you kind of take for granted when you read something that, you know, it's as if it was just, you know, it all just rolled out kind of. I mean, you know that it wasn't a first draft, but I guess it's just kind of discovering that how that process works, how that kind of technical aspect of it works.
Actually, you've worked as an editor on children's books and young adult books, or
I mainly worked on the young adult list when I worked at Omnibus Books. Did quite a few picture books as well, but because I'd been working on adult books and adult fiction before that, then a lot of the YA and a little bit of middle grade novels as well came to me. So.
Yeah. What's it like as to be writing when you have been an editor and you've got, you know, that part of your brain is the one that's perhaps most instinctive? Does that affect the way that you approach your writing at all, do you think?
It definitely does, but it has to be kind of switched off a little bit, because, I mean, for a long time, you can just stop yourself before you even start, because everything you write, you just kind of like Nah. So you've really got to, you know, just give yourself license to write really badly and just keep going, and don't think about it, don't censor yourself, don't, you know, just get words on the page, and then you can come back. And I think that is, like, editing skills are useful when you're trying to get things to work. You know, you've gone off in the wrong direction with plot, you've got to somehow, you know, pull it back and then, you know, come around and make it all work. So I think that's having an editing brain there is helpful. Yeah.
So yeah, it sounds like it's very useful in the making it better and crafting aspect. Was it at all hard for you at first to turn off the editing part of your brain so that you could, to allow yourself to make the word, like, keep going with words that maybe, you know, weren't coming out exactly as you would like to see them on the page?
Yeah, that took about 20 years.
That is encouraging for everyone watching, and for me. Thanks, Gina. I'm going to keep coming back to that in my mind. I'm aware that I could just talk to you about writing and editing, like, for another hour, and then we won't have got back to snow. So I'm going to take us back to snow. I wonder if you could talk a bit about one element that you entirely introduced, which is Snow's closest companion, Little Bear, who's a cub and later a grown bear who her mother, or the bear's mother, was killed by the hunter, and Snow wears her skin as a cloak, and yeah, they're inseparable throughout much of the book. Can you tell us a bit about that relationship and how you came up with the idea of Little Bear?
Yeah, that's another one, and another kind of creative thing that I can't really explain. I don't remember consciously thinking that there was going to be a bear, or so that was something that emerged, you know, during the writing process. I mean, I always love animal companions in books. You know, dogs, obviously. And, you know, who wouldn't love a bear?
As long as it doesn't eat you.
Yeah, as long as it doesn't eat you, that's true. There's definitely, that's where the fairy tale element comes through pretty strongly there, because, you know, I think I've written somewhere else that I definitely don't agree with keeping bears as pets, or tigers, or any wild animal should not be kept as a pet. So, you know, that's just where a bit of poetic license comes in, that you can have those kind of things in a fairy tale if you want. So basically, she's a dog. She's a dog.
A fantastical dog.
Yeah.
That's
She's also very useful because she often keeps Snow warm in really cold, you know, circumstances. And I like how, you know, she, Little Bear often can, she kind of is, she helps Snow by kind of letting Snow have an insight into the animal kind of world, like the animal senses, sense of smell, sense of, you know, all of those intangible things that happen outside or in the wilderness that animals pick up on but humans can't. So in that way, that's how they're really close kind of companion. That, you know, they're a team. They work like that. So yeah, she's very useful companion to have.
Well, I imagine an enormous tame bear would be a very useful companion to have when you are lost in the wilderness.
Yeah, very warm. Yeah.
I think it's interesting the way that Snow and Little Bear become companions is, you know, through, you know, the bear's mother being killed by the hunter is, it's an interesting origin for such a close companionship. And I think it's, in a way, goes to the heart of the emotional texture or moral texture of the book, which is that it's not black and white like a traditional fairy tale. Snow reflects at one point, there weren't as much clear cut about right and wrong as I'd once believed there to be. If the hunter hadn't killed the she-bear, I might be dead by now, and I wouldn't have survived the night without her fur. It seemed to be that every action set off a spinning wheel of possibilities. How important is that idea and that kind of moral texture to the book?
I guess that's where I'm kind of playing against that idea of fairy tales. You know, where there is this clear moral, you know, message that's designed and it's inbuilt in the fairy tales. That was always something that I struggled with. You know, reading YA, editing YA, is this kind of idea that, you know, all books for children, for young people, you know, needs to have this moral message. You know, you should be clear about what's right and what's wrong. And along with that, all of the kind of censorship that goes into it, you know, you can't say that, and that's not appropriate, or, you know, so there's all these rules around it. And I guess in a fairy tale or a fantasy world, you can get around a lot of those things, and you can make it a lot more black and white, and a lot less black and white, you know, those kind of keep those grey areas going a lot more, or kind of look into them a lot more. So there is that ethical issue with Little Bear, like, you know, how she ends up with Snow is tragic, but then Snow does her best to raise her, but she can't do as good a job as, you know, her own mother. And the hunter's struggling with his own issues as well. And Snow's also struggling for the whole book of, you know, on how she's going to live. You know, is she going to run away, or is she going to kind of confront her problems? And in that way, you know, she has a lot of agency in the books. Snow White, you know, in the Grimm brothers, she just is a pawn in the whole, like, she doesn't do anything except in the whole fairy tale, she really doesn't do anything. So my Snow has, she takes control of, you know, of her own destiny, I guess, and doesn't just, you know, get carried off by the Prince Charming. She makes her decisions and follows her own path. Yes, yeah, as much as she can.
Yeah, which is what makes it such a great story, I think. And I mean, that's interesting when you take it back to the original fairy tale and her inaction, and I suppose what drives her story is all about female rivalry, isn't it? Or different ways of being a woman. You know, her stepmother's jealousy of her because she's so beautiful. And I think it's interesting that in your version there is that jealousy of the stepmother, but that too is more complicated. She's not jealous because she's beautiful. She's angry at her getting attention, but it's not just about beauty. It's about attention and also not being able to control her. Can you maybe talk a bit about that?
I guess that was kind of my play on, on that kind of narcissistic tendencies of, you know, the social media world, that kind of thing. So, yeah, it's not about beauty, it's about attention, it's about airtime, it's about, you know, likes and all of that kind of stuff. And so because you can't really base, I mean, you can't, beauty's not something that you can, that has aged well as far as that fairy tales go. Of course, you know, we don't live in that kind of a world anymore. It is more complicated, like you say. But I didn't want to have the evil stepmother and just, you know, leave it at that. She's actually based on Princess Diana's stepmother.
Wow, that's fantastic.
Whose name is Rain Spencer, Rain with an E. And you know, one of those research rabbit holes that I fell into, she, so if you even just read Lady Rain Spencer's Wikipedia page, it's basically the character, my character in the book. She, except she's got one stepchild, but the real Rain Spencer had 4, as well as 4 of her own children, who she just kind of like had and then moved on to her stepchildren.
Which is suggested that Snow's stepmother also did. Okay.
I'm telling you all my secrets here, Jo.
I love it.
But so yeah, and I guess it really is a very simple relationship in the end, though. There's nothing that holds Rain and Snow together after Snow's father dies. They're just 2 people who kind of, drift apart, but are drawn together all the time by this issue of property and also Rain's just rampant jealousy and vanity, really.
Yeah. I do like that. That was so fascinating. I'm so glad I asked whatever question led us down that rabbit hole. I do like that Rain is, although she's a nasty character, she's not, like, you've given her a little glint of humanity in that Snow says, reflecting on the way Rain felt about her father, I didn't doubt that she loved him. He were the only person she was kind towards, and it weren't just for his house and possessions. Was that a conscious decision to allow that little glint of humanity?
Yeah, and also just like, well, why else would she, why else would she go and live, up on the mountain in isolation, without any comforts or any of her friends in the city? Like, she must have really loved Snow's father and cared for him. So, in a practical way, it's her motivation. And then she just kind of gets too far away from her normal life in the city and, just through pure isolation, she becomes kind of detached from all of those old connections. Yeah, so a bit of both there.
Yeah. So I guess part of that is that you're looking at it in such a way of, what drives these characters. And so you're finding human things that drive them, and that makes them more human.
Really trying to stay, that's kind of a reaction, isn't it, against those tropes that always crop up in fairy tales. You've got the princess, the evil stepmother, the prince, so then they're always there. And in that kind of fairy tale genre, I mean, it's almost like when you read those, it's almost like, notes towards a novel. It's like the very barest outlines, this happened. And you go, well, why did that happen? Or, what drove that? And I think one of the things about Snow White is that all of the characters are human. It's not like Rumpelstiltskin there's no actual magic or fairies or... Are there? I'm pretty sure there's not. There's a magic mirror, obviously, but
of course. Oh, is the magic mirror in the original tale?
Yeah, it is. Yeah,
okay.
There's lots of rhyming, verses that obviously I stayed well away from. That's not one of my writing strengths, and I'm fine with that.
I don't think it suffers for the lack of.
Magic mirrors, but apart from that, everyone is human and goes, so yeah, they can't just be one dimensional. There's got to be something. Otherwise, it's just not interesting to write, is it?
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, I wonder, we've talked about most of the main characters in the book, but I would like to talk a little bit about the miners, who are, I think, a much darker version of the dwarfs in the original Snow White story. Can you tell us a bit about how you created them and what their role in the story is?
Well, they're miners, which is true to the original. I think I've got a few more of them. I think I've got 12, and there's 7 in the original. I think now that they also, well, they're there, you know, to push the story along. They, you know, they serve a couple of important kind of tasks, and that one is this kind of education of Snow. Like she's really naive up until then, and so as far as that, they kind of are responsible for educating her. She gets some of that naivety knocked out of her. She also learns useful skills, like, you know, how to throw a knife and, you know, all of that.
As you do.
Know these things. But, you know, there's also that threat there, and, you know, I guess that's kind of like the looming outside world that they represent. They're also kind of almost like a Greek chorus, you know, they're kind of there to kind of comment on what's happening in the action of the book, and they often speak kind of as one, or you're not really sure who's speaking. There's just kind of a couple of main, well, there's a trio of particularly nasty ones, and then there's one who kind of helps Snow a little bit, but she's never sure about his motivations. Yeah, so and then, you know, obviously getting away from them is her next drive. It's her next, you know, it's the next thing. She can't stay there forever. She knows that, and in a way, the refuge there was always going to be temporary, and she probably stayed longer than she you know, would have thought that she would. But and she also grows up during that time that she's with the miners. You know, she goes from being a girl to, you know, a young person. So she goes through that kind of physical and mental transformation as well, and it's kind of when she gets to that point that she really has to go, because things start getting tricky.
Yeah, she goes from being a girl who's a slave to, well, essentially a slave to these men, to being a young woman who's essentially a slave to these men, and that's a bit more dangerous.
Yeah, that's right. And she realizes that, and it can't go on forever. But they're the ones who push her into that by chaining up the little bear and you know, constantly threatening her with turning her into her stepmother and claiming the reward. So they, you know, they really push her into acting, into the next thing that she has to do, get away from them.
Yeah, they don't let her become comfortable.
No.
At all. No. Yeah, I was it's so interesting reading a book like Snow, where, you know, it has that reference to the fairy tale, because, you know, I found the experience of it was that I would get lost in just the story I was reading, and then every once in a while something would crop up, like you know, they're encountering the miners, that has a reference to that tale, and you're kind of like, oh yeah, that's right. And it was really pleasurable kind of tension, I think. You've said that you're fascinated by the way that nature reclaims landscapes when humans have retreated. Like you referenced Chernobyl after the nuclear accident. And I found that really interesting. I wonder if you can talk about how that plays into your inspiration for the book.
Yeah, I guess it's almost a cliche, isn't it? The kind of jungle reclaiming the concrete jungle, you know, in dystopian or kind of futuristic movies, and especially movies, because it's really a visual thing, isn't it? That, you know, weeds coming up through the concrete and roads cracking and all of that. So I just love that kind of stuff, because I think it ultimately it's because it's optimistic. You know, you can, like, there's just that kind of power in nature that it's resilient and it wants to come back. It wants to, you know, creep back in. And it was, you know, everyone noticed it during the lockdown. I mean, I'm sure it's the same in Australia, but in New Zealand, you know, it was just, everyone was just noticing once the traffic stopped, you know, there were all of a sudden more birds, whether they had been there before, but we just weren't hearing them. And I don't know, even, you know, going out for walks and stuff, you'd notice that without cars on the road, you know, leaf litter had fallen on the, you know, and things just had just kind of already, you just notice that as soon as we're a little bit quieter, then, you know, nature just kind of comes back. And, you know, you see it on social media, like foxes running down the main street of some English village, or, you know, it's just, in a way it's a cliche, but I don't know, there's just something there that is just endlessly fascinating and hopeful, I think.
I think you're right when you say hopeful. I mean, that's something that, I mean, this is quite a hopeful dystopia, actually. It is, in that it has that sense of, you know, that human civilization has gone backwards. And there's a kind of beauty in the return of nature and the hope in how much it might regenerate. So that's really interesting. I
did a paper in my honours degree, which was on utopias, and I may have been slow on the uptake, but it was only then that I realised that, you know, there's a dystopia in every utopia. Like nothing can be perfect all of the time. So I guess that really stuck with me as well. So like when people describe snow as a dystopia, yeah, I feel a little bit sad for the world, because actually there's a lot of good going on there. And actually I don't think it, you know, if humans are the ones who are suffering, like perhaps we've got that coming to us anyway, really. You know, a little bit of harsh reality may not be a bad thing.
Well, a bit of rebalancing of priorities, perhaps.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah. If I sound too harsh, you know, what I mean is, you know, maybe we don't just take for granted that you turn on a tap and water comes out. I mean, there's so many people in the world who don't have that privilege, or, you know, being able to flick a switch and there's heat coming into your house. So in a way it's kind of a critique of, you know, Western kind of urban culture more than anything. There's plenty of people in the world who know what it's like to cart their own water and build their own fire. But I think, you know, maybe we've forgotten a bit about how hard that can be, how much time it takes up.
Yeah, so like hyper-technological, I'm about to make up a word there. Hyper-technology, convenience culture, that kind of, yeah.
Yeah.
I have just realised that we probably need to invite audience questions now. Tracy, do we have any audience questions?
We do have some audience questions. So there's two that are quite similar. So I'll just ask you one of these. Hi, Joe and Gina. Great chat, thanks. What age group would you say snow is suitable for?
I'm going to let Gina answer that.
Well, I was going to let you answer it, Joe, because you're the bookseller and the publisher. I think probably all ages, you know, will find something in it. I mean, I think that you could read it to quite little kids, because, you know, there's nothing particularly scary or anything like that. So this is my editor's brain kicking in now. I'm looking for like swear words and gratuitous violence. There's none of that.
No, well, I'll do the publisher's site,
yeah, exactly.
Which is there is a hint of sexual assault, not sexual assault, but the threat of it when we did the teacher's notes, that was probably the one thing that we
Yeah.
highlighted as like, if anyone is looking out for things, that's probably the main thing. Other than that, as you say, it's not really that scary. Or there's just moments of tension, but it's nothing that's overwhelming. We've kind of said it's for early high school or higher, as like a guide, but also, I mean, we've got, I think the people who are really responding to it, a lot of them are actually in their early 20s or older readers. So I think that you're right in that it's got quite a wide range, because it's also quite a literary book too. But also one person who I gave the book to, a friend of mine who's director of Feminist Writers Festival, who said she absolutely loved it, and she read it to her young daughter who's in upper primary school, and she said she loved it. So I think that really shows that it can be for quite a range.
Yeah, I agree. I'm certainly looking forward to reading it, and I must probably fit in that older category, but not too old. So
just by a hair, Tracy.
just a bit. Lynette, hi Lynette. She asks, Gina, as an editor, was the process of working with an editor on your writing strange or difficult? And what did you do when you disagreed on something?
I would never disagree with Margot on anything, I don't think. She's got excellent judgment. It was a bit strange. Yeah, it was a bit strange. But I guess I trusted her judgment, and by that stage I really just needed someone else. I was so close to it that I just needed a different opinion, as many readers as possible really at that early stage of editing, to point out problems or and actually the great thing about Margot and all good editors is that often their feedback or things they'll say, this isn't quite working, you actually already know that it's not, and you were just trying to pretend it was working.
So does that mean that it's kind of affirming your instincts in some ways as well?
Well, yeah, but you're constantly trying to lie to yourself as well to get out of confronting problems. So I guess it's not necessarily comfortable process, and there are instincts, but they're not necessarily good instincts.
So it's not entirely comfortable, but it's definitely good for the book and ultimately rewarding.
Yeah, definitely. It's really, it's amazing to be on the other side of it and have that kind of help and close reading of someone else. It's just an amazingly valuable thing to have someone really care about something as much as you do, and give it as much kind of close attention as that. So that was just pure fun, really, apart from it being a lot more work, but it was just great.
Excellent.
Great. Margaret says, I enjoyed the swings and roundabouts of the relationship between Snow and the hunter, including the introduction of the attractive princely rival. Did you struggle with the happy ever after scaffold of the original?
Yes, and rejected it because the other quote that I came up with from reread from the book is the prince after he kind of comes across Snow White in her glass coffin in the forest, and she wakes up because the poison apple has fallen out of her mouth. He says that he will honour and prize her as my dearest possession. Says, you will marry me, and Snow White kind of goes, all right then. Yeah, didn't want to kind of, it just doesn't seem. I think that's the amazing thing about versions is that, you know, you can stay with that same framework, but you can put your own spin on it and your own bias. So yeah, I didn't see any need for Snow to marry the prince necessarily. It always seems like the obvious choice.
And you actually put in like the hunter as kind of a romantic rival as well, which obviously was not in the original.
No, that's true.
Was that something that you intended to do, or did that just kind of like happen as well?
I think it developed. You know, once you're following those breadcrumbs along the path, then that's just, you know, if the hunter comes back, first of all, Snow, you know, makes him a promise that in exchange for her life, and so obviously, you know, he's going to reappear at some stage. But you know, Snow doesn't really realise that she has feelings for the hunter until she has some knowledge of what else, you know, what other options there are, as in, you know, the prince. So when she's presented with a choice between the prince and the hunter, then, I mean, not that there's a choice, she can go her own way as well. And, you know, they do end up together at the end of the book. Oh, I shouldn't say that, that's a spoiler.
Spoiler alert!
Yeah, but obviously another aspect of the fairy tale that I resisted very strongly.
Yeah. Were there more questions for Gina, Tracy? I don't want to just...
Just a few more. So Nikki says Snow's provenance, parentage differs to the originals. Was this something you wanted to explore for a particular reason?
The what, sorry?
Her parentage differs, provenance / parentage.
Oh, yeah, that's true. Yeah, it does. And that remains a mystery. That was also part of my, you know, almost everything is working against those kind of expected tropes of the characters, fairy tale characters. So, you know, where is she? Who is she? Where is she from? It's all a bit ambiguous because I really didn't want to go with that kind of, you know, white princess stereotype. So I introduced a couple of little twists there, something just to rub against that kind of and mess things up a little bit, confuse things.
I'm glad someone asked that question because it was one of the ones I'd meant to ask you and didn't get in, so thanks.
Somebody bet you to it. Looks like Nikki's asking this question on behalf of Iris, who's 9. She must be there with her. And she says, is there another fairy tale you'd like to do a retelling of?
Oh, I don't know about that. If I did, I think I'd choose one of the like really weird ones that kind of don't make any sense. You know, one of the obscure ones that no one really knows. I've got my fairy tales here. It's funny, isn't it? Like the ones that have lasted the test of time, and you know, the ones that have fallen into obscurity. So I think if I was to write another one, I think I would choose one of the obscure ones and see what happened if I was going to follow that kind of trail, see where that trail of breadcrumbs, to refer to another fairy tale, leads. Great question.
Great, so that leads into Kerry's question then. What are you working on next?
Something quite different. I mean, it's actually a historical novel, and it's set in Wellington, and strangely it's also got a bit of a topical theme in that it's about 2 girls who get abandoned on a quarantine island in Wellington Harbour. And it's based on a true story. So I really had fun with researching that. The island in the harbour was used for all sorts of things. So it's really fascinating. But this one particular story really snagged my interest. And so it's kind of about abandonment, and it's also about disease and separation, and also how, a series of, small misfortunes adds up to a really big tragedy. So, yeah, it's been fun working on that. I'm not sure whether it's adult or YA at the moment. I think it remains to be seen.
We can't wait to see. So Margaret says, remediation or retreat is a question of sea level rise that many coastal areas currently face. And I love the way you dealt with that in Snow, except it was all too easy for the city to be relocated. Was this a question that crept in, or one you were conscious of wanting to address all along?
About whether to just up sticks and move a whole city, or to kind of battle on. I mean, I guess that's the city and its location is kind of a metaphor for, people moving on and like accepting change in a way. Like, for years and years, they've been trying to fortify the city, build up the walls, and the sea just keeps on coming and keeps on coming. And so, and then, they have these voyagers arriving the whole time as well. And so you can't fit everyone in. It's like, so they're expanding. And then they do just kind of up sticks and retreat inland once they have the opportunity to. I guess we all have to kind of make that decision, don't we? Especially if, in Australia and New Zealand's the same. Lots of people live on the coast. And I think it's really hard for people to kind of give that up. And yet the problem is pressing. It's, every big tidal surge we have in Wellington, the sea comes up over the sea walls and damages property. But people still love to live right on the beach, so it's going to take a big, I mean, it's totally understandable. But it's that kind of resistance to change, which I guess in itself is a comment on the global resistance to adapting to or stopping climate change. And it's always going to be a balance, isn't it? We're in too deep now to really get out of that. So we have to work out what we're going to compromise and what we're going to stand firm on.
Great. And just, we have one more question here. Why did you invent the distinctive accent of Snow's language?
That's another thing that just kind of came, and it was there in the first line of the book that I wrote, and then I stuck with it. It was a lot stronger to start with. It got smoothed out and kind of developed a lot, during the editing process. But the reason I kind of stuck firmly with it, I mean, I could have got rid of it at any stage really, but I don't know. I've done a little bit of, language study into languages, and they change so much. So you wouldn't expect that people living, a couple hundred years in the future are going to speak the same way that we do. So I just wanted to really make a gesture towards that and have a little bit of fun as well with writing that as a, I don't know. Really, it's not realistic. A realistic projection of where the New Zealand dialect is going to end up. It's just it's a whim, really.
It does give it that really otherworldly feel, so that makes sense. Yeah. So, Tracy, is this the end of our time together, or?
This is the end, isn't it? It's 11:30. Oh, quickly, Jo, just from myself. So, we were speaking earlier of Snow's companion bear. So Joe, who's your little companion bear we can just see in your screen there? He's been listening the whole time.
This companion bear, is that what you mean?
That's the one.
Thanks, Tracy. He really wanted to get on screen, so.
Great. Well, we do have a 9-year-old watching, so she's probably loving that.
Hi, Iris.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Joe and Gina, for joining us this morning. And Gina, all the way from New Zealand, beaming across the oceans to us. It was wonderful. Your book sounds magnificent, and I do have my copy right here, and I can't wait to read it. And it sounds so fitting in today's climate and circumstance as well. So thank you again for joining us. And Gina's books can be bought, like I said, from Imprints Booksellers, our bookseller partner for today. Their phone number is 8231 4454. And please keep following the Marion Library's Facebook page, our website, and check your inbox to be kept up to date on all of the upcoming Library Through the Lens presentations and workshops. So thank you, ladies.
Thank you, Tracy. Thank you, Joe.
No problem. Thank you for coming, everyone.